Let's bring in Andrew Hustler Paterson now from Winnipeg Sports Talk, our good and longtime friend. How you doing, Huss?
What's up, Hot Rod? How have the Menchies been lately? How's your heel turn? The heel turn going over there in the heartland of CFL territory.
They bite every single time, Huss. You'd think they'd be getting used to my act by now.
Well, I mean, you know what? This is something that really does hit home for a lot of people, especially where we do our shows in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba. This is about as true a CFL area, territory of the country and the world than where we're at right now. So, man, when that news and the report from Naylor came out last week, needless to say, gave us a lot of mileage on the shows for the last few days. But I understand why there's so many people around where we are that are sort of up in arms and that are legitimately concerned as to, you know, a very uncertain future going forward for the league, even into this season.
I have a real burning question for you on this, but before I get to that, I just want your thoughts on the news. If you are thumbs up or thumbs down on a potential merger.
Well, I mean, ideally, it wouldn't come to this. Ideally, the CFL would be prosperous. It would be healthy. We'd be growing to 10 teams. But unfortunately, that's not reality. And that wasn't reality before the pandemic. And then when you add in a global pandemic that has done what it's done to so many businesses that weren't flush with cash, it's put them in arguably the most precarious situation in the 100-plus year history of the league. I mean, I love football. I love the CFL. I love the Bombers, the Riders, Labor Day Classic. I love everything about it, and I want that to continue. My first takeaway from this, Rod, was that, you know, this would not be being discussed. We would not be going down this road if there were any other viable, realistic alternatives. My takeaway from all this is that this is an incredibly dire situation for the CFL. And I'll tell you what, if keeping football in Canada and keeping Blue Bomber games going means that we need to do some significant changes to a lot of things that, you know, aren't that palpable for a lot of fans, I think it has to happen, because give me 4-down football, give me the Bombers playing the DC Defenders on a Saturday afternoon over no football at all. Last year sucked. I want to see these stadiums full. I want to see fans back at games. And I think it's obvious that, you know, the business situation with the Canadian Football League has been the impetus to all of these discussions and everything that we've been hearing over the past week.
Huss, in life, I firmly believe this. You're either going forwards or you're going backwards. And the CFL's been going backwards. The numbers are there. It's been shrinking. That's where it's going. So it needs to change. Now, my burning question to you, as the ardent CFL supporter as you are, lifelong, is the ratio. Because a lot of my closest friends are Canadian CFL alum, Chris Getzlaff, Luke Mullender, guys like that. And they've said, I wouldn't have had a career if it wasn't for the ratio. And that's true. And this viewer, James Thrice, watching on YouTube, says in a CFL XFL merger, they could do something like the NFL Rooney Rule, where teams have to try out at least X number of Canadians or international players each season. And I thought about that exact thing on the weekend, but I'm not a big believer in the Rooney Rule, even though the minorities like it. I'm not sure that it serves entirely what it wants. Just to try out Canadians in camp, if you know you're going to cut them, what's the point? So the ratio is the elephant in the room on a potential merger here, right? Where you stand on that?
Well, I mean, just back to the Rooney Rule. I mean, there's been a number of coaches. Mike Tomlin's a perfect example that, you know, probably got their opportunity to go in and have that conversation and impress people because of the Rooney Rule. And, you know, the rest is history. I mean, I'm all for giving more people opportunity, especially ones that have been in situations where maybe they didn't get a fair shake in overall. Here's the thing with the Canadian players in the CFL right now. It's a big part of the CFL game. But the minute you expand to what I think is being discussed, it makes it way, way harder to pull off. Now, do I think it's important for the CFL? Absolutely. I think of guys here in this community, and Wade Miller's a perfect example. He's the boss of the Blue Bombers right now. I mean, Wade Miller is not a professional football player and probably not in the situation he is in right now, leading this football team, the Grey Cup champs, may I add. if he didn't get that opportunity to play coming out of college.
Say it again. The Bombers are the defending champs. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, well, listen. It took us a long time to be able to stump that, and then we didn't even have last year to do it, so it's still the champs. But honestly, I do think it's important. I think it's a great thing to have. However, Rod, moving in the direction that they're going, I don't think it's realistic. Now, one of the things the CFL did and had been going to is the international players. So maybe, especially if the idea of this ex-CFL, whatever you want to call it, is to not only be, a North American league, but sort of be the innovator and the leader in spreading football worldwide. Maybe it's an international quotient or quota, where you could have players from Europe, you could have Canadians, you could have whatnot, and the teams in the United States wouldn't have to focus on Canadians, whereas those of us would. Listen, I would love to see it stay, but I don't know how realistic it is. But I will say this. I think the improvement of Canadian players right now, and Naylor spoke to this, I'm sure he mentioned it to you. I mean, we've got, significant Canadian players at skill positions as well, not just, the big boys on the O-line in the NCAA. We've seen them making the National Football League, and we certainly see them, in many cases, dominating positions in the Canadian Football League. So I am not of the opinion that just because the Canadian ratio is out, we won't see any Canadians in the Canadian Football League. But I think it's safe to say a number of the players on that borderline that might not have gotten the opportunity, that would get the opportunity now, might not in the future. And that's an unfortunate side effect of what may have to happen to keep professional football going north of the border.
I am 100% in alignment with you, and I've been in football long enough to know that the quality of Canadian football right now, coming up from the grassroots, has never been higher. But I also think that that ratio may need to go down the line. And I understand people don't want to hear it, but I don't. And then present to me an alternative, because I haven't been able to think of one. Now, I got to change gears because we're running out of little time here. I want to talk about Winnipeg Sports Talk, but I also want to talk about the Jets. They schooled the Leafs. So are the Jets the number one team in the country or what?
Well, not yet. But I mean, I think they've done a lot last week to kind of move into the conversation. It's unbelievable how the Jets have sort of been overlooked, especially by sports books all year long. I mean, even tonight, the Jets are a home underdog again to the Montreal Canadiens. It happened twice last week. They won them both games. There's been no better team if you've been betting this year and getting value on than the Winnipeg Jets. The game on Saturday night, I think, was a big statement. I mean, it was great to get the 3 out of a possible 4 points in the first 2 games, but I think anyone that watched that game knows that this was just a perfect example of why Connor Hellebuck won the Vezina Trophy last year. The high danger chances in particular were entirely skewed in the Leafs' favor, and the Jets overall, I think, were fortunate to get those points. Very different story on Saturday night. In a lot of ways, I think even Paul Maurice afterwards was talking about, you'd like to bottle that up. I mean, everything they did in that game was the kind of the blueprint for taking on a high octane team like the Toronto Maple Leafs. You're not going to get that each and every night. And credit where credit is due, as much as a lot of people like to throw shade at the Leafs, that's a hell of a hockey team right now. And they are first place for a reason, and they've deserved it. But with 6 more games left, and I mean, even Rod going into tonight's action, I mean, the Jets are 4 points back with 3 games in hand. They've given themselves the opportunity to be in the conversation for that top spot. And I think most importantly, as we all know, it's great. It may more so this year than any other year. I think it would be special to win a division title, being the one year we're having, all inter-Canadian play. But you got to get to that top 4. You got to be in the playoffs, and you have to be peaking. And it seems like the Jets they are making some improvements. Certainly, we'll see what happens at the trade deadline. I think that defense core could certainly be improved. But I'll tell you what, they did it on Saturday night, and I think we'll have a lot more conversations about the Jets being in the mix with the top teams in the North Division and being a real tough out once we get to playoff time, especially with 37 in net, who will be starting against Corey Price this evening.
His 700 start for The Price is Right. And we like Hella, too, because we're goalie guys. Craig Smith. You know Smitty. writes in, Hustler, love your show too. Good for an old Winnipeg boy, which we're going to get to Winnipeg Sports Talk. There's a niche for daytime sports talk in this country, as we're finding, Huss, that wasn't being served. From Jason in Red Deer, how can the Jets be underdogs against a Canadiens team that is struggling and just lost 2 in a row to the Flames? We'll discuss that later. And from an Army friend of mine, Ryland Betker, he says, go Jets go, work with and play hockey with a Leafs fan. The chirping has been amazing. For me, not so for him. That's from Ryland. Just talk about Winnipeg Sports Talk, Hustler, in the 2 minutes that we have left, if you don't mind.
Well, awesome. Thanks a lot, Rod, and thanks to you. So it's interesting, seeing, the timing of our shows. I think there's a lot of our listeners that are popping into the RP show from 11 to 1 and then jumping and joining us on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Everyone around this market knew the incredible void that was left when our old station, TSN 1290, was abruptly shut down out of nowhere. So myself and Michael Remus have started up a Winnipeg Sports Talk. It's a channel that begins with kind of our flagship show, Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily, every day. It's on at 1 p.m. right after Rod finishes up on YouTube. Check the channel at Winnipeg Sports Talk and give us a sub. And then, of course, the podcast. Most people usually listen to me driving home from work. We wanted to make sure that new, fresh content was in everyone's feeds.
1 p.m. on YouTube Live, 3 p.m. the podcast uploaded for Winnipeg Sports Talk. He got it all in. So, we got him? Okay, yeah, just wrap up real fast, Huss. We just lost you where you said 1 p.m. on YouTube, and then it's 3 p.m. on the podcast, and that's all they need to know. Yeah. Follow your feeds, right?
Exactly. I mean, at Sports Talk WPG on all the social channels, winnipegsports.com is the website. You can go in there, click on YouTube, hit the sub button, and whatever podcast feed you get, we'll be firing that fresh content in, focusing on the Jets and Winnipeg sports first up, as well as all the other big stories of the day in the feeds by 3 p.m. every day. And we thank everyone for the support. It's been phenomenal.
It is. I enjoy listening to it, too. All right, Huss, keep in touch, my man. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me, Rod. All the best.
Andrew Hustler Paterson from Winnipeg Sports Talk joining us here from the Manitoba capital, the Slurpee capital.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.